What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Grade A's TV, and today we're going to be talking about the mysterious disappearance of Brian Schaeffer. Brian Randall Schaeffer was born February 25th, 1979, and was raised in the Columbus suburb of Pinkerton. His parents were Randy and Renee Schaeffer, and he had a younger brother, Derek. At the time of his disappearance in 2006, Brian was 27 years old and in his second year of medical school at Ohio State University, where he had previously completed his undergraduate degree in microbiology. Brian enjoyed spending time with his family and friends, as well as traveling to tropical locations. He also really enjoyed music and stated that he dreamed of one day starting his own band. At Ohio State University, Brian met fellow medical student Alexis Wagner, and they began dating. They had been together for about a year at the time of Brian's disappearance. The two planned to head to Miami for spring break later that year, and it is believed that Brian was planning to propose to Alexis on that trip. Early in March 2006, Brian's mother died of a rare form of bone cancer. According to his friends, Brian appeared to be handling his mother's death reasonably well. However, they figured he may have been finding it harder to cope with than he let on. Brian was last seen on the evening of March 31st, 2006. It was a Friday and the last day before spring break. Brian and his girlfriend were going to leave on their trip to Miami on Monday, and like every college student, he was happy to be finished with another semester. Brian was ready to relax since he had spent the entire week staying up late and studying for exams. On top of all of this, he was still dealing with his mother's recent death earlier that month. Brian's father, Randy, came to Columbus that evening to spend some quality time with Brian and took him out for dinner. Randy noticed that Brian appeared tired and felt he shouldn't go out drinking, but later said he knew Brian was an adult and could make these choices for himself, so he didn't say anything at the time. Brian said goodbye to his father and headed to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, where he met his friend William Clint Florence around 9:30 p.m. From there, Clint and Brian went bar hopping, taking a shot at each place they went, working their way down High Street towards the Arena District. The Ugly Tuna Saloon was a large room with the bar situated in the middle. The main entrance was accessed by going up the escalator, turning right, and walking across a small landing type space. Anyone entering or leaving from the club would be caught on surveillance cameras, so the only way to leave the Ugly Tuna would be through the main entrance or through the emergency exit leading to a construction area type site, which was reportedly very difficult for a sober person to navigate, let alone someone who had been drinking. So around 10 p.m., Brian called Alexis, who was visiting family in Toledo that night, to tell her he loved her and he was excited for their trip. Around 12 a.m., Brian and Clint met with Meredith Reed, Clint's friend, and she gave them a ride back to the Ugly Tuna, where they planned to see the live band that was playing and have their final drinks before calling it a night. At approximately 1:15 a.m., Clint, Meredith, and Brian were captured on surveillance cameras riding the escalator up to the entrance of the Ugly Tuna. Once inside the Ugly Tuna, Brian became separated from Clint and Meredith, though they claimed to see Brian talking to the band. At 1:55 a.m., which is 5 minutes before closing, Brian was captured on surveillance cameras talking to two college-aged girls. The footage then showed Brian going off camera back towards the bar entrance. And this was the last official sighting of Brian. At around 2 a.m. when Clint and Meredith were leaving, they called Brian but got no answer. They did a quick scan of the bar and then they went outside to wait for Brian there. They tried to call him again, but there was still no answer. And once they noticed that everyone else had left, the two figured that he had gone home without telling them. Much later on Saturday morning, Alexis called Brian, but only got his voicemail. She wasn't too concerned, assuming he was sleeping, but continued calling him throughout the day without an answer from him. By Sunday, Alexis was worried and called Brian's father, who was also not able to contact Brian at the time. When Brian didn't arrive to the airport on Monday morning for his flight to Miami, he was reported missing. Now, I talked to other people about this case, and I kind of do that in the research sort of process of it. And something that I found weird and some of the other people I was talking to found weird was that they didn't report Brian missing until that Monday where he didn't come to the airport. And I thought it was weird that I'm assuming he stayed alone. No one went to check on him at his house. I mean, he didn't answer the phone on Saturday morning. Okay, maybe he's sleeping late. He's not answering the phone all Saturday. And then you're his girlfriend, you call his dad, and he's not answering his dad's calls either. Why wouldn't either of you or either his brother or someone just go to where he was or where they thought he was to see what was wrong? I mean, if I'm calling somebody and they haven't answered all day, I'm thinking something might be wrong. I might not be too suspicious, but at the same time, if it's someone like my son or a boyfriend or a girlfriend and that sort of, and you're close enough to where you could just go to their house, why wouldn't you? Now maybe she was still on vacation at the time, maybe she was still with her family, but I mean eventually still at some point you would think that somebody would go over there and check on him, but no one checked on him until, no one was really that concerned until he missed his flight on Monday, or when he didn't show up to the airport on Monday. So I thought that was a little strange. I don't think his girlfriend or his father had anything to do with his disappearance or anything like that, but that was weird. And I guess it wouldn't be weird if it turned out that he was just sleeping and he ended up being okay, but the fact that he ended up going missing, that's what makes every little thing that they didn't do kind of weird. The initial search began at the Ugly Tuna, where the last official sighting of Brian took place. Investigators also searched the surrounding areas, as well as dumpsters around the back of the building, but found nothing. Tracking dogs were used to search any waterways or sewers in the vicinity, and investigators took the dogs inside and around the outside of the bar to see if they could pick up any scent, but there was still nothing found. And Brian's apartment was located about 6 blocks away from the Ugly Tuna, and when investigators went to his apartment to check if anything was amiss, they found nothing there. And everything was in order, including Brian's car that was parked there in its regular spot. And getting desperate, Randy, Brian's father, actually contacted a psychic who stated that Brian's body would be found in a body of water. And Randy and Derek, along with others concerned for Brian, actually searched the rivers that were close by, but they still didn't find anything there. The staff from the Ugly Tuna and the band were questioned by investigators, as well as anyone they could think of who may have come in contact with Brian that night. The staff and band were cooperative, but were unable to provide any useful information concerning Brian's disappearance. But this is very unsurprising given how busy the bar would have been that night, nor would anyone have a reason to notice Brian any more than anyone else, unless they were specifically looking for him or knew who he was. Clint and Meredith were questioned by police and asked to take a polygraph test, which Clint refused to do. Clint also got a lawyer soon after the investigation started, and he has been subjected to pretty heavy criticism for these reasons. Many think that if he had nothing to hide, why wouldn't he just take the polygraph test? It never really seemed like police were targeting him as a suspect. People just found it really weird that he would go as far as not taking the polygraph test and getting a lawyer, as if he had something to hide. I know that makes it seem like there's something to hide. The 2 girls Brian was seen talking to were also questioned by investigators, but were never asked to take a polygraph test. And since the night he disappeared, Brian's cell phone, credit cards, and bank account have not been used. So now I'm going to get into some of the theories on what may have happened to Brian. And I'm just going to stick to about 4 because there's a lot. I mean, some even think that he was abducted by aliens. So I'm not going to go that far. I'm just going to do 4 and then give my opinion on what I think may have happened to him. So the first theory is that Brian slipped out unnoticed at the end of the night and met with foul play as he walked home. So the explanation for this is that Brian was talking to the band while they were packing up, so the bar had already closed. And the staff may have locked the front doors, thinking that everyone, like all the customers, had left without realizing that Brian was still there. So because of that, he may have then left with the band and the other staff members and then began to make his way home alone through that back alleyway, and then that's sort of where he may have gotten mugged and eventually killed or something along those lines. And that theory does make some sense to me, and it's a reasonable theory, and it's very possible that would have happened, because if they did lock the front doors and he was still there, then he probably would have just waited with the band and then walked out with them and the rest of the staff through the staff exit. And then maybe after there, because that was in the back, maybe there weren't cameras in that location, and he may have even been a little lost and not knew exactly where he was, especially considering that he had been drinking throughout the night. So he might have gotten lost, maybe ended up in the wrong part. It was already a dangerous area. But the only thing that kind of squashes that theory is that, like I told you earlier, his cell phone, his credit cards, and his bank account have not been changed or anything like that. That kind of destroys that theory, but then maybe they didn't know his PIN, so then they couldn't use the bank account anyway. And for the phone, I don't know, maybe they just didn't want it and they threw that away. But this is pretty plausible. This could have happened. So the second theory was Brian went out the emergency exit and ended up in the construction site where he fell into a hole and passed out. And then the hole was eventually covered with cement. Now this theory, again, it's possible that this could have happened. I do not think this happened at all. Just because I would like to believe that even if he did like pass out and fall into a hole, that was on a Friday. I don't think workers came in on Saturday to fill that hole. And you would think he would have woken up at that point, and maybe if he'd not been able to get out, he would have at least yelled and brought some attention to himself. And even if you say, okay, maybe they did come that Saturday or something, or maybe he died immediately, like he fell into the hole and died because he fell weird, you would think that they, like workers, would check that hole before they filled it with cement. I personally don't believe that that is a possibility. I mean, it could have happened, but I would like to believe that people wouldn't let that happen. Like somebody would eventually check that hole before they filled it up with cement just to make sure everything was like all right. But you never know. I mean, anything is possible. So I don't believe that theory, but that is a pretty reasonable theory. The third theory is that Brian died accidentally inside of the bar, and the bar staff were worried about lawsuits, so they snuck him out of the emergency exit and disposed of his body. To rank the four, this is my least believable theory, just because why would the staff go through that much trouble to hide a body? I mean, I'm a waiter. If someone died in that restaurant, I wouldn't cover it up so that the restaurant wouldn't get sued, because that doesn't affect me. I mean, maybe I'd lose my job, but I don't think that's enough of a reason to actually cover up someone who died in the restaurant. I don't see that many people putting their lives at risk to cover up something for the bar as a whole. I just don't see that. And the final theory that I am going to talk about is Brian disappeared to start a new life. And this can be supported because investigators never actually found anything suggesting foul play. However, no activity has taken place on Brian's cell phone, his bank account, and he didn't withdraw any cash after that night. And you would think that if he did want to start a new life somewhere, he would have at least used one of those things to get started. He would have had to get some money out. And as far as I know, there's no evidence that he took out a large sum of money out of his bank account a couple days before or a couple weeks before his disappearance. So that theory, again, I understand where that theory came from, but I don't think that happened either, just because. So from what we know about Brian, he was in a happy relationship, and everyone around him assumed that he was going to be proposing to his girlfriend on their trip to Miami, which was, he disappeared on Friday, the trip was on Monday. So that's one reason right there why he wouldn't just disappear. But you do have to keep in mind that his mother did die earlier that same month. And maybe that did affect him to the point where he did just want to like leave and start over. You never really know how someone thinks. So that is a possibility. So if I had to choose one of these theories to go with, I would probably go with the first one, where he was talking to the band. The staff didn't realize that there were still people in the actual bar, so they locked the doors, and he had to leave with the band and the staff through the emergency exit, or not through the emergency exit, but through the staff only entrance/exit. And then maybe he got lost and got mugged and eventually murdered by someone in that area, just because that was an area known for its high crime rate. Now, the only thing that wouldn't answer that is, why weren't the police able to find his body if that did happen to him? But maybe the people who murdered him, maybe they took his body somewhere else outside of town, and that's why police weren't able to find him. But if I had to choose a theory and what I believe happened to him, I would go with the first theory. It just makes the most sense to me. And I can't see Brian just running away, starting a new life. And I can't see him falling in a hole and dying or anything like that. So that's what I think happened to Brian. Unfortunately, we'll never truly know what happened to him unless a body's found. So after Brian's disappearance, Alexis actually continued to call Brian for several months, but it always went straight to voicemail, apart from one time in September when the phone rang 3 times. She thought this meant that Brian's phone could have been turned on. However, Brian's cell phone provider dismissed this theory as a glitch. And sadly, Brian's dad, Randy, was killed in a freak accident in September of 2008. His obituary was published online, and the public was able to comment on it. A comment that was investigated said, "Dad, I love you, Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." However, it is determined that this comment was a fake, having been written from a public computer in Franklin County, where Columbus is located. And I'm going to believe that this was a fake comment. And the fact that's sick to me, that someone would post this knowing that Brian had disappeared just to start rumors and things of that nature. And that sort of ends the Brian Schaeffer story. The case is still open, and I'm sure that his brother, who is now all alone, his mother is dead, his father died, and his brother just disappeared, and he probably assumes that his brother's dead at this point. So it's just his brother at this point. Hopefully he gets answers on what happened to Brian at some point in his life. As of now, Brian is still missing. Hopefully there is a break in this case and they do find a body, or Brian still alive maybe, you never know. But that is where I'm going to end this video. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think may have happened to Brian. Maybe out of those 4 theories, which one do you think is more likely? Or if you have your own theory, maybe list that. If you list alien abduction, I'm going to read it. Just give me a little more information on why you think it might have been alien abduction. I mean, anything's possible, but I would love to just hear what you guys had to say, what you guys think about this case. But that's where I'm going to end it, and I'll see you in the next video.